They called it a legend when the last witnesses died, when the palace walls fell to vines and rust, when the crown that once pulled sunlight into a room vanished into a tunnel carved by fear. But legends don't breathe like this. Legends don't send letters sealed with wax and fingerprints. Legends don't put plane tickets in your hand and whisper in your ear at 3 in the morning, "Wake up, the story is finally ready to be told." Elena Maris woke to the whisper before the alarm. A Johannesburg morning was still blue in the window, the skyline a row of sleeping teeth. Her phone buzzed once, then stilled, as if the message inside it didn't want to be caught making noise. She reached, thumbed open the screen, and saw a photograph that should not exist. A corridor of black stone, a slit of gold at the far end like a closed eyelid, and on the near wall, an emblem she had chased through footnotes and dead archives, the kneeling lion of Arinthia, etched within a circle of laurel and flame. Beneath it, a ring-shaped shadow and 3 letters scrawled in graphite that made her mouth go dry. Ama Amina, the last queen, the one who vanished. Elena didn't respond. The sender's name was simply Z, which meant Captain Injabulo Dlamini had finally found something he didn't know how to bury. He never abused a dawn message. He'd been Elena's first field guide when she was 19, and loud with fragile certainty, the one who taught her to step lightly in places where dust remembered more than people. If Z said come, it meant the ground itself was about to tell the truth. Her apartment held the smell of cinnamon and old paper. On the dining table sat 3 masks carved from riverwood, gifts from elders who once trusted her with their stories, and a map pinned with constellations of red thread. Every line came back to Arinthia, that small kingdom pinned between a chain of blue mountains and the desert's slow ocean, a place that laughed at maps and punished the proud. 20 years ago, the Shadow Council caught fire there, a handful of men and a hunger with 1,000 mouths. The coup lasted a week. The silencing lasted a generation. The royal bloodline dissolved in rumor. The crown, vanished. Elena packed without thinking. A practiced breath. Field journal, 2 cameras, spare batteries. The battered copy of Songs of the Hill and the River, whose margins she had salted with notes. She slid the book into the bag like a talisman. On the back page, a fragment of an old lullaby she'd never been able to place. When the lion kneels, the valley kneels. When the valley wakes, the stars take off their shoes. She wanted to text Z. Where? When? Is it safe? But safety had never been the point of her work. Truth rarely wore a helmet. She answered with a single question. How deep? And Z replied with a grainy voice note drowned by wind and tires on gravel. Deep enough to matter, Ellie. And I think we're not alone down there. By noon, a commercial jet was cutting through African sky, a silver line scratched across a bowl of blue. Elena's seatmate slept with his mouth open and hands clasped as if he'd been praying and got bored midway. She watched a cloud peel itself apart and imagined that the woman who used to wear the crown, Amina, who looked tired even in the photographs, had watched the same shape break above the same mountains and understood what exile costs when you're not allowed even the dignity of losing publicly. In London, a man who pretended not to be a prince counted coffee spoons and minutes. Tariq al-Sabir managed a small gallery in Shepherd's Bush that specialized in photographs of places that no longer looked like themselves. He liked the way absence made a face. He liked the language of edges. His mother, once a shadow in beautiful rooms, had taught him to iron shirts perfectly and to speak 5 languages quietly. When he was 12, she pressed a ring into his palm, heavy for its size, and said, "This is a story you cannot tell until the story wants you." He wore the ring only at night in the kitchen, when the kettle sang and ghosts looked like steam. It had the kneeling lion on it. He never Googled the symbol. He didn't need a stranger's paragraph to tell him what his blood already carried with unnatural care. If he looked too long at his hands, they wanted to write a letter to a people who didn't remember him. If he looked too long at his reflection, the room around it became a throne room without a chair. At 3 in the afternoon, an envelope slid under his gallery door as if shy. He almost kicked it in irritation, then read his name and stopped. Inside, A single key with a tag stamped Palace East Archive and a note written in unsteady block letters. "We know what you hold. Come claim what is yours, or we burn the rest. There are moments the future insists on standing up." Tariq locked the gallery with a hand that didn't feel entirely his, felt the ring on a chain under his shirt press against his sternum like a knuckle. On the tube to Holborn, he tried to convince himself this was a prank, a theater kid's idea of a thrill. But when he reached the address, a brick building pretending to be boring, the man at the desk didn't blink. He looked at the tag, then at Tariq's face, then at the chain around his neck, and he breathed out something like relief. "It's not gone then," the man said. "Thank God. What isn't?" Tariq asked. "Proof," the man said, and led him down a corridor that smelled like damp wool and old ink. In the vault, under glass, lay a ledger bound in dark cloth, a map folded to the same tier, a photograph of a woman at a balcony who could only be Amina by the way her sadness took up dignified space. Beside these, a velvet-lined box with an oval depression a ring could complete. "Where did you get these?" Tariq whispered. "They were mailed to us 10 years apart," the man said. "From different cities, always with the same instruction. Wait for the one with the lion." The hallway light flickered. Somewhere above, a door closed with ambition. The man swallowed. "Someone else came by this morning asking for you," he said. "They didn't leave a name." Tariq took the box in his hands and felt an old corridor breathe. He wanted to put the ring into the velvet. He wanted not to. He did not move. The man looked at the clock and said, "If you are what I think you are, sir, you don't have long to decide." In the air above the mountains, Elena dreamed with her eyes open. She saw the throne room from the photograph, black stone slick as memory, the slit of gold like a promise. She thought of the lullaby. She thought of Z saying they were not alone down there. Once, when they were students, they had gone into a mine that was not a mine and listened to the rock mutter words they couldn't transcribe. "Every kingdom has an underkingdom," Z had told her. "Every story, a shadow version." The taxi from the dusty airstrip to the capital coughed and sang. The city didn't look like the pictures from before the coup. Photographs always lie about time. A charcoal market leaned into the road. A girl in a pink shirt carried a bucket that looked too heavy for her future. The palace ruins rose from the hill like a patient animal. Z waited beneath a jacaranda tree, its blossoms stamping the ground purple like passports. He hugged Elena so hard that bones compared notes. "You look tired," he said. "You look haunted," she said. "Haunted is a kind of awake," he said, teeth white in a face chiseled by sun and responsibility. He led her up a back trail that used to be an official path and now was a rumor through thorn and stone. "They sealed most of it," he said. "But the earth doesn't sign treaties." Rain kept working. "We found a gate that was never supposed to be a gate. At dusk, bats wrote their names on the sky and the palace swallowed them. They crawled under a beam so old it had forgotten being wood. Just wait." Elena's backpack scraped rock and offered sparks to the dark. Z's flashlight licked a wall and pulled away with distaste. The corridor carried a cold that had nothing to do with weather. When the beam opened into a chamber, the air tasted like coins and sleep. Elena saw it at once, the kneeling lion framed in laurel and flame, the ring-shaped depression under it. She stepped forward and felt a draft on her face as if the room were inhaling her. "It's here," she whispered. "It's here," Z agreed. His voice didn't sound like it belonged to him. He pointed at a crack in the far wall where mortar looked new. "Someone sealed something recently." Elena set up a camera. The ambient noise meter blinked like a heartbeat on a hospital machine. She could hear water somewhere, the careful drip of time. She took the book from her bag, turned to the lullaby without realizing, and read it like coordinates. "When the lion kneels, the valley kneels." Z touched the lion carved in stone. Nothing moved. Elena pressed her palm against the ring depression. The wall offered back a temperature like old hands. She closed her eyes and asked the room what had happened here. Sometimes rooms answer if you remember to be polite. When she opened them, a light glowed faint at the slit beyond, a quiet line like a blade deciding something. Z's beam straight up to the ceiling, and the ceiling answered with a small, dry sound as a section of stone slid aside. Air fell. With it, 3 faint gray feathers, so soft they looked like errors. Z froze. "We're not alone," he said again, not because he needed to be believed, but because the truth prefers repetition. Above ground, a truck idled. 2 men smoked without moving their mouths much. In London, Tariq stood in a vault holding a velvet box, while the man at the desk tried to look useless and therefore harmless. In Johannesburg, a kettle clicked off in an empty kitchen, steam wandering like an accent without a country. In Arinthia's under-kingdom, Elena put the book away and lifted her chin to the dark. "Amina," she said, not loudly, as if the queen might be shy now. "I'm here." Something out of sight smiled without showing teeth. The first trap did not spring like a movie. It clicked delicately the way a teacup settles on a saucer. Z's flashlight died a very theatrical death. Elena's camera hiccuped. Screen strobed white, then black, then settled into a fixed green lens like a night animal's eye. The slit of gold narrowed to a hairline and then winked out. "Door," Z breathed. "Secret door," Elena said. "Closing," Z said. "Fast," Elena said. He grabbed her hand and pulled. The corridor decided to be narrower than it had been 5 seconds ago, as if embarrassed by its earlier generosity. They ran not up or down, but through, bent at the waist like apologies, the lion's face sliding along the side of her eye like a ship passing. Sound collected around them, footfalls that did not belong to them, whispering whose language they knew but could not place, the singular note of metal not far enough away. The world shivered and went still. When they burst into a smaller chamber, the first thing they saw was a candle that had no right to be lit in a place without air. The second was the emblem repeated smaller, repeated again, and below, in a drawer that looked carved from night, a sheaf of letters tied with a ribbon the color of dried blood. Elena reached. Z put a hand on her wrist. "We picked them up. Something else falls down," he said. "I need to know," she said. "I need you to stay alive," he said. They stared at each other in a small island of breath. She nodded once. He let her. She lifted the bundle, and the room sighed, rearranged itself almost imperceptibly, and somewhere behind them a shape took 1 step closer. She didn't turn. She untied the bow, slid the first letter free, and read 2 words written in a woman's hand that shook like a leaf. "My son." The candle guttered. Above, the door that was not a door became all doors closing at once. Underground, a kingdom inhaled. In London, a ring warmed. In a glass case, the photograph of a tired queen tried to look less alive than it was. In Elena's chest, a sentence sharpened into a spear. It was never a legend. It was a lullaby for a child who survived. The sound of a footfall found them. Z did the math on violence. Elena did the math on time. The shadow on the wall stretched in the wrong direction. And then, like a curtain, a voice drew across the passage, polite, almost amused. "Dr. Maris," it said. "Captain Dillamini, shall we stop running from a story that only wants to be finished?" The candle went out, and darkness, patient for 20 years, opened its eyes. Darkness does not mean absence. In old rooms, it means memory has chosen to turn the lights down and let the other senses work. Elena could hear her own name hanging in the air as if it had been pinned there long before this night, like a coat waiting for her to grow into it. Z shifted, weight on the balls of his feet, a predator contemplating which way a trap will laugh. The voice came again, no longer amused. "You have something that belongs to us," it said. Elena's fingers tightened around the letters. Paper is brave when it must be. "These belong to their writer," she said. "And to the one they were written to." Silence, and then a short, honest chuckle. "Sentiment," the voice said. "You can keep sentiment. We will take proof." Z's hand found Elena's elbow, gently steering her toward the sound of moving air. A fissure, perhaps, an exit that would rather be a rumor than a door. "Talk to me," he whispered. "Keep them looking at your voice." Elena didn't ask who they were. The Shadow Council didn't sign Christmas cards. She took a breath that tasted like wet limestone and grief. "Do you know the song?" she asked the dark. "When the lion kneels." "Don't!" the voice snapped, suddenly closer. "Don't say it like you have a right." "Helena," Z breathed, warning stitched into her name. "But I do have a right," she said, with a calm she borrowed from future hindsight. "I am the story's witness." Something touched the back of her neck then, not a hand, but the cold edge of a room's attention. She moved forward as if she had always meant to, found the fissure with her toes, slid sideways into a throat of stone that thinned with every foot. The letters scraped against her jacket. The ribbon whispered secrets to the seam. Z came behind, his breath slow like a drummer keeping time for a march that must not speed up. Behind them, footsteps argued about silence. The fissure curved and dropped. Elena tasted iron. Somewhere ahead, water breathed. The passage opened just enough to let them stand again, and in that space, Z's hand brushed a switch carved like a leaf vein. He didn't push it. "Either that opens the door," he muttered, "or it drops a ceiling. Or both." "We don't have time," Elena said, which is exactly what a ceiling likes to hear. She pushed. A panel to their left slid reluctantly, then with sudden enthusiasm, and a ribbon of night unfurled into a lower vault perfumed by damp archives. They fell into it together, and the panel above them sighed shut with the resignation of a librarian. Shelves grew from the rock like careful trees. On them, parcels wrapped in cloth and wax, jars with rolled scrolls, boxes labeled in a hand that grew more cramped as it aged. In the center of the vault, a table made from a single plank of a tree that had not said yes to any saw. On the table, a map pricked with gilded pins. The pins formed a constellation Elena knew from childhood, where the belt had 2 extra stars the elders said belonged to a lion who refused to lie down. Z's beam found a lantern. Matches lived in a tin that had been expecting them. The lantern took light and made a bowl of it. Elena's face came back to her, older than she remembered, softer. She laid the letters on the table and peeled the first one free, knowing without reading that this was not a time for stealing secrets. But secrets sometimes want to be stolen by the right thief. "My son." The letter began again, as if Amina had nothing else left to call him, and perhaps she didn't. "I could not carry the crown without turning cold as its metal. Forgive me for the nights I chose the people over you. They were not different from you. They were you multiplied. The shadow that entered our house wore familiar faces. I will not name them here, not in ink that can be forced to testify, but I will give you a road. In the north wall of the throne room, the lion kneels not out of submission, but because his weight opens the earth. Place the ring where it listens best. The valley will kneel and rise again. If I have failed you as a mother, let me succeed as a map." Elena's throat closed. She didn't look at Z. She didn't need to say Tariq's name. It stood up by itself inside the sentence. She turned the page and found a date that made her skin prickle. Written the week of the coup, the week the palace windows learned to hold their breath. She wanted to ask aloud the impolite question, "Did you survive?" But the lantern flame leaned right then, answering in a language of drafts. "Move now." There is a kind of audible quiet that means men with orders are walking toward you. It has boots in it. Z heard it first. He swept the lantern dark with 2 fingers and took Elena's wrist, and they moved along the rows with the posture of thieves who regret the necessity but will not apologize for it. They found a second fissure behind a stack of ledgers fat with taxes nobody had paid, and slipped through into a passage where the air went thin and the world pulsed as if they had entered under a heartbeat. "Up," Z whispered, and they climbed, hands and knees, a prayer knitted into grunts. Above them, the floor of a different room waited, and when they lifted it, gently, both palms, a tabletop pretending to be stone, Elena's head lifted into a shadowed library that smelled of cedar and ink and authority. The ceiling was high, the windows narrow. The books here had been touched by important hands. On a pedestal, a glass case with a velvet base and an oval depression like the museum in London. A line of arithmetic ran across Elena's mind. Ring to slot. Slot to mechanism, mechanism to door, door to crown, crown to light. She reached. Z's fingers trapped hers. "We don't have it," he whispered. "We know who does," she whispered back, the sentence heavier than it should be. London answered like a chord at that moment. Tariq, still in the vault, watched the man at the desk perform a pantomime of bureaucratic indifference, while both listened to the stairs trade the weight of approaching feet. "If they're coming for you, they can't be coming for her," the man said under his breath, and Tariq didn't ask who her was. The box lay open now, velvet expectant, and he knew with a clarity that felt like music that the ring belonged in the old stone back home, not here under the numb light of a foreign bulb. He took the ring off its chain. It felt warmer than London permitted. He thought of his mother humming when she ironed, of the way she said his name on the one night she told him stories that made the walls stand closer. "Al-Sabir," she had said. "The patient one. You will be asked to wait longer than is polite. But patience is not inactivity. It is a weapon with exquisite timing." The door to the vault opened. 3 men entered wearing expressions they had borrowed from their fathers. The leader carried a confidence like a borrowed coat. He smiled without friendliness and said, "Mr. Al-Sabir, we've been looking forward to our inheritance." Tariq put the ring in his pocket and kept his hands visible. "Do thieves use the word inheritance now?" he asked. His voice surprised him. It sounded almost amused. "We're not thieves," the man said. "We are the remainder. You, sir, are a rounding error." The archivist, who had been rehearsing cowardice since breakfast, found a sliver of courage and said, "This is a museum. You have no papers?" "Papers," the leader said, savoring the word, "are a thing for people who know they are temporary." He stepped closer to Tariq. "You look like your grandmother," he murmured. That stubborn line of the jaw. That superior sadness. She always did think a country could be something other than a well-managed ranch. "What do you want?" Tariq asked. And it was an honest question. "The performance to end," the man said. "The pretending? Give me the ring, and we will make sure your small life continues to be survivable." Tariq considered the smallness of his life. The gallery, the tea, the keyboard clicks, the careful budget. He considered the bigness of the ring. He considered a room under a hill he had never seen and the letters on a table in a vault where a lantern held a bowl of light. He smiled then in a way that irritated the leader and said, "Do you ever worry that your enemies are more interesting than you are?" The leader's smile shrank. "I worry about very little," he said, and extended a hand whose nails were too clean to be forgiven. Tariq did something unexpected. He turned. Very gently placed the ring on the velvet, leaned close as if listening for a breath, and then lifted it again. The velvet made no sound anybody else could hear, but he heard the perfect kiss of shape-finding shape. He put the ring in his pocket once more and said, "Now you have heard it too. That is the sound of history not choosing you." The leader's hand moved like a snake then, but the archivist had not been a coward for hours in vain. He hit the alarm. The vault doors looked embarrassed at the thought of closing late, but they did their best. The 3 men moved not like criminals, but like professionals who had paid for this moment in advance. Tariq ran. He did not run out of fear. He ran like a message. The ring thudded softly against his thigh. He wanted to rewind the last minute and watch the velvet kiss again, not for romance, but to confirm he had not imagined the way the past sighed when it recognizes its own weight. He reached the street and found night sharp and damp, the kind that fogs your glasses with someone else's breath. He hailed a cab and said Heathrow, then changed his mind mid-word and said, "No, St. Pancras," and hated himself for still thinking in terms of permissions. Paris would get him to Ayr. Ayr would get him to Orinthia. The ring would get the door to stop pretending it was a wall. In Orinthia, Elena and Z ghosted through the library to a balcony that let them see the city's lights argue with the stars. The air carried spice and the pot metal scent of generators. The Shadow Council's men were in the West Wing now, methodical, not hurried. They believed the story owed them patience. Elena looked down at the courtyard and saw the outline of a map traced in the paving stones. The same star pattern with the belt extended. She felt the ring-shaped depression in her palm like a phantom. and she understood that some rooms are designed to be finished by descendants. Z leaned on the rail. "We can vanish tonight," he said. "Become sensible people. Send the letters to a newspaper. Let others bleed." "Would you believe me?" Elena asked. "If I said I don't know which choice is the brave one?" "I would believe you," Z said. Then he grinned without showing teeth. "But I also know you. You'd never forgive the version of yourself who chose the email." They moved at dawn, slipping through a city that wakes with purpose, even after 20 years of being told to keep its voice down. A woman selling bread wrapped a loaf as if it were a warm secret and pressed it into Elena's hands. "For the road," she said without asking any questions. "For the crown." Elena almost dropped it. She had not said the word aloud to anyone. By noon, they were at the old river gate, where boys once dove under in summer to dare the current to love them back. A boat waited that no one had arranged. The ferryman did not look at their faces. He watched the water as if it had lines he was reading with his eyes. "Pay when you have something worth paying with," he said, and pushed off. They went upriver past homesteads with laundry singing and goats arguing, past a cliff whose shape the elders called the mother turning away, past a row of trees that had outlived 3 governors and 1 plague. Z pointed to a bend where the current coiled. "There," he said. "That's where the tunnel wants to begin." On the far bank, a shrine to a saint no one officially recognized held 7 candles, all lit. Elena touched the first and whispered, "For Amina." Z touched the second and said nothing out loud. The third candle had already burned down to a stub, as if somebody had needed it more. The tunnel's mouth hid itself behind ferns that smelled like rain. They went inside. The air cooled the way a fever breaks. The walls here were not stone, but stories baked so long they forgot their words. Elena followed the map written by the letters more than by ink. The sense of a woman moving swiftly, not because she had lost hope, but because she had given it away like bread. They reached a door that was definitely a door even though it pretended, and Elena stood very still and said, "The ring." Z's hand touched his empty chest. London hummed, a promise and a problem. Elena laughed then, not cruelly, but like someone hearing a joke that took 20 years to land. "He's coming," she said. "How can you know?" Z asked. "Because this part of the story wasn't written for me," she said. "I'm only the one who found the letters. He's the one they were written to." Night arrived on schedule, startling nobody. In Paris, a man caught a train while deciding whether to be a man or a symbol. His mother's ring was heavy enough to threaten the balance. He thought of arithmetic again. Small life plus large history equals a new definition of weight. He slept in bursts. In his dreams, a woman wrote by candlelight and refused to cry because ink dilutes tears unfashionably. In Orinthia, Elena and Z built a small fire out of permission and hunger. They ate bread that tasted like a promise that will be kept in the morning. They did not speak of what they would do if the morning refused to arrive. Somewhere above them, the city sang softly to itself in rooms that still remembered where the beds used to stand. Before sleep, Elena took out the last letter. The ribbon. Resisted once, as if asking whether she was the right pair of hands. She was not sure. She untied it anyway. "My son," Amina wrote. "If you are reading this, it means I placed hope in a wall and the wall remembered to hold. The ring is not a key. It is a reminder. The door will open when 2 things meet, the weight that shaped you and the witness who refuses to forget. You will not wear the crown to be taller. You will wear it to bend lower. If I am not there to tell you this, let the room tell you. It knows the shape of our family's knees." Elena folded the page very carefully and slid it back under the ribbon. Her eyes felt scoured. She wanted to ask the night what exactly it thought people were for. But the night was busy being night. It offered sleep instead. She and Z took turns trusting it. At almost dawn, when rooms are most honest, steps came, down the tunnel with the hesitation of a man asking a country if it will accept his apology. Z rose and took a position that allowed him to be either a friend or a wall. Elena stood and did not smooth her hair. The figure stepped into the kind light of their small fire, and the ring under his shirt knocked once to announce itself. "Tariq al-Sabir," Elena said, and her voice made it sound like a sentence that had been waiting to end. He looked smaller than she expected and larger than anyone ought to be when they are carrying the weight of a country and the fear of being a fraud. He nodded to Z. He looked at the door. He looked at Elena like a student trying to guess which page the exam would quote. "I wasn't sure you would be real," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would come," she said just as quietly. "I almost didn't," he admitted, and then I looked at a velvet box and heard a sound only I could hear. "History, choosing," Elena said. "It can be quite musical." He smiled then, sudden and bright and gone. He reached for the chain around his neck and drew it out. The ring hung in the air like a small planet being careful. He stepped toward the lion's kneeling flank, saw the slight oval worn into the stone by hope, and paused. "I don't know the words," he said. "You don't need words," Elena said. "You are the sentence." He breathed, not for himself, but in rhythm with some older lung, and pressed the ring to the stone. The door did not dramatize its obedience. It opened like a well-brought-up person who has been waiting by a gate too long and is relieved there will be no scene. Air came first, clean in a way that suggested it had been sealed in with care. Then light, not the lion's slit blade from before, but a kind roundness that comes from gold that has decided it still has work to do. They entered the chamber that had been the spine of Orinthia and found the crown on a pedestal that never learned how to bow. It was smaller than any drawing had ever dared suggest, as if the burden of a country should sit lightly or not at all. Around it on the walls were stanzas of carved stories in a language the guides would never teach tourists, a language of vows spoken before rivers and witnesses. Elena's throat made that sound it makes when something you love finally arrives and is exactly itself. Tariq did not touch it. He knelt. He knelt like a man who had been taught by a woman who had knelt before him every night to tie his shoes when he was too small to reach. He knelt as if the kneeling was the point. The ring in his hand felt suddenly unimportant. The crown, respectful, did not glow. It simply waited. Z stood at the door, listening to futures shuffle their feet. "We won't be alone for long," he said. "Then we won't hide," Tariq said, and in that sentence Elena heard the end of part 2 and the beginning of whatever a country calls its own second breath. They did not carry the crown out like a trophy. They did not raise it high or show it to a camera that wasn't there. Tariq placed it in a case made from a soldier's coat and his mother's shawl, two kinds of protection that had always done their best, and they moved as a group not of conspirators, but of custodians. The tunnel widened as if it were proud of them. The air felt younger with each step. By the time they reached the shrine under the 7 candles, the morning had pried open a slice of sky. Birds were already discussing the day. The ferryman waited in the boat as if he had been carved with it. He didn't look at the bundle. He looked at their faces and nodded as if to say, "You have brought back something heavier than gold and lighter than shame." On the water, the current did not offend. Elena watched the shore slip, watched the palace hill approach with the reluctant grace of an old animal standing up. Z kept one hand free, the other on the small of her back, as if to remind the river that they were reading this story and did not need editorial assistance. Tariq sat like a man trying to convince his spine that it belonged to him. "What happens now?" he asked. It was not a rhetorical question. "Now we choose who witnesses," Elena said. "And who tries to run the ending?" "That's never up to us," Z said, not pessimistic, simply well-informed. At the river gate, the city had not yet quite decided what day to be. Markets yawned, Cats negotiated with bakeries. Small boys invented new physics with sticks and dust. The three of them moved through streets that remembered parades and funerals and years when there was no difference. Word travels faster than feet in a place that values stories. By the time they reached the Palace Hill, a quiet crowd had begun to form, as if the city were a hive and someone had knocked politely. On the steps of the West Wing, three men waited, familiar in their unfamiliarity. The leader from London had flown faster than trains could forgive. He wore a suit that obeyed him. His mouth was amused and dangerous. "At last," he said. "The theater comes home." Z moved before Tariq had a chance to be brave alone. He stepped between the bundle and the suits and did the arithmetic of angles. "You had 20 years," he said. "If you were meant to find it, you would have." The leader's smile didn't change. "We did find it," he said. "We just used other people's hands to carry it." Elena felt the crowd's listening tilt. She stepped up beside Z and did not lift her chin. She lowered it slightly, the way you do in a church or a court. "Amina wrote letters to her son," she said, voice unamplified and somehow huge. She left a door that required two kinds of weight to open, inheritance and witness. "You have neither." The man's eyes cooled a degree. "I have men," he said. "And we have a country," Elena said, and only then did she realize the crowd had moved closer in a way that would make certain mistakes expensive. Tariq did not unwrap the crown. He did not need to show it to make it true. He climbed 3 steps, then stopped so he would not stand above anyone. And he spoke not like a prince, but like a person in a long line of people asking forgiveness in order to be given authority. "I do not want a throne," he said. "I want a place to kneel." The words did what words do when they match the shape of a room's memory. They fit. The West Wing's windows did not rattle. The pigeons did not erupt theatrically. Instead, someone in the crowd, a woman with a hairscarf tied in the style of a photograph Elena had seen of the Queen speaking to a market, began to hum the lullaby that had hidden in the book. Another voice joined, then another, and soon the air wore the tune like old perfume. When the lion kneels, the valley kneels. When the valley wakes, the stars take off their shoes. The leader glanced irritated as if music were bad manners. "Remove them," he told his men, but his tone lacked the conviction it had worn in London. Removing an idea is difficult even on good days. Z leaned toward Elena. "If they start shooting, they won't," she said, and hoped she wasn't lying. Not in front of this many phones. Phones had indeed appeared like flowers after rain. "Lenses do strange things to courage." The men in suits counted hands, calculated headlines, remembered orders written for other circumstances. The leader chose a different weapon, doubt. "To whom will the army answer?" he asked Tariq softly, almost kindly. "To a song? To a museum ring? To a gallery boy who inherited a tragic face? Maybe to a choice," Tariq said. He turned to the crowd and did something dangerous. He asked them to choose. "I didn't come to take anything," he said. "I came to put something back. If you will not have me, I will carry this back into the dark and leave it there for your children to find when nobody remembers my name. If you will have me, I will hold it only long enough to show you how to hold it yourselves. This is not how crowns are usually offered. This is not how history is usually asked to dance." That may be why it worked. An old man on the steps, whose cane had learned the palace better than any guard, lifted his stick and pointed it at Tariq's heart. "Your grandmother," he said in a voice that sounded like leather, "once brought my wife a sack of rice and did not let the newspapers come." "Wear it like that?" Tariq bowed to the old man first. Then he turned to the bundle and unwrapped the shawl from the coat as carefully as a midwife reveals a face. The crown took daylight without flinching. It did not gleam too much. It had no need to be impressive. It looked like work. The leader spoke to his men in a language of teeth and retreat. He stepped back, only one step, only enough to maintain the pose that this was a strategic repositioning. "This is not finished," he said to Elena, as if reading a line the script had forced on him. "Stories never are," she said pleasantly. "They just grow up." They went inside before anyone could give the world an ending it would regret. In the throne room, the kneeling lion looked almost content, as if joints long stiff were relieved by motion. Elena placed Amina's letters on the pedestal beside the crown. Paper has a dignified way of making gold behave. Z stood with his back to the door, not because he expected an attack, but because he understood how peace is kept. Tariq did not put the crown on his head. He held it in both hands and lowered it until it touched his forehead, briefly, like a blessing in a faith that does not trust words. Then he turned and looked at Elena with a question he had been carrying since the vault in London. "What would you like to do with it?" he asked. She blinked. "Me? You opened the door," he said. "You read the letters. You are the witness. If you say this is not yet the right room, I will carry it somewhere else and try again." Elena thought of every archive where a bored guard had said no with a yawn. She thought of each grandmother who had ended a story at the exciting part because the child should learn to be patient. She thought of Amina writing by candlelight and making a map out of apologies. "This is the right room," she said, "but it cannot be the only one." And that was how Arinthia's crown did not return to a single cabinet behind a single lock. That was how the city's old train station became a museum where the center hall was reserved for listening, where the crown sat in a ring of chairs instead of behind a velvet rope, where the letters could be read in the morning while roosters bragged and again at night by students who spoke softly out of respect. That was how the palace's East Wing opened 3 afternoons a week to school children who were told by guides trained to say, "We don't know the answer to that. Let's ask the room." The Shadow Council did not hold a press conference to announce its defeat. It dissolved the way bad math dissolves when a teacher switches the lights on. Some members were absorbed into lives that paid better in ways that didn't make them proud. A few lingered, convinced power was a tide and would return to wash their feet. They were not entirely wrong. Power does what water does, but the floor had been raised in the meantime. The tide would have to work harder. There was a ceremony, because people need ceremony the way lungs need air folded properly. It was held not at midnight or noon, but in that hour when goats return from hills and firelight decides where to sit. No one announced a coronation. A choir sang an old song and a new one at the same time. The army's uniforms looked less certain and more human. Tariq knelt. The old man with the cane touched his head with 2 fingers and said, "Wear it like rice." Elena stood near the back, near the door, ready to catch anything that fell, a word, a child, a future. Afterward, in the courtyard where the map in the paving stones could be felt through thin shoes, Tariq found Elena and handed her the ring. "Keep this," he said, "not because it is valuable, but because a witness should be able to open a door without asking permission." She closed her fingers around it and realized her hand had been waiting to hold something exactly this shape. "What will you do?" she asked. "Learn to listen while people talk," he said, a smile that already belonged to the country nudging his mouth. "What will you do?" "Write," she said. "And shut up when the story doesn't need me." Z appeared with 3 bowls of stew and a look of someone whose job is to be sure nobody dies after the 3rd act. "Eat," he ordered. "Even legends need beans." They laughed like people who had earned it but didn't plan to tax the universe's patience. Night climbed the walls with careful feet. Somewhere beyond the city, the river turned in its sleep and promised not to swallow anyone tonight. The crown slept in its circle of chairs, guarded by a woman whose job title was listener, who would wake you gently if you snored too loud. Weeks folded themselves into the neat drawers of days. The museum breathed. Children learned the lullaby whole. A woman came one morning and placed a sack of rice on the pedestal beside the letters. She did not leave a note. The archivist in London received a package containing a photograph, a small crown in a circle of chairs, a boy peering at it with an expression of being chosen and not yet afraid. On the back, someone had written, "Thank you for keeping the light on." The leader of the men who had called themselves Remainder came once, late, alone, and stood by the door and watched the ring of chairs. He looked like a man who had arrived at a restaurant without a reservation. He left without being noticed and hated the gentle efficiency with which the door closed behind him. On an ordinary afternoon that refused to apologize for its ordinariness, Elena stood at the balcony of the East Wing and watched the city. Her book lay open beside her, but she wasn't reading. Tariq joined her, quiet. They watched people become smaller with distance, and then large again as they approached. A geography lesson conducted by feet. "I keep expecting to feel different," she said. "To wake up one morning and discover I am taller or shorter or less in need of coffee." He nodded. "I know," he said. "Sometimes the only evidence of change is that the same room forgives you for different sins." She laughed. "You sound like a prince." "I'm trying to sound like a person," he said. "That's the job." She turned to him. "There's something I didn't put in the report," she said. "The first time we were in the vault, when the candle went out and the voice said we were running from a story that only wanted to be finished. I think that voice belonged to someone who was supposed to love Amina." He considered that, the way you consider a bone you might trip on. "Then we will write a chapter even for him," he said. "Not a kind one, but a true one. True is kind," she said softly. Eventually, he touched the ring she wore on a chain now. "Keep it," he said again. "If I break something, I need you to open the door we forgot." She looked at the city. "Doors were always the point," she said. "Not walls." At night, when the last visitors left and the floors shone like lakes, the crown did what tools do when people aren't watching. It rested. Not in glory, but in readiness. The letters did what love letters do. They told the truth more beautifully than necessary. The museum guards played cards badly and took turns losing on purpose. The moon considered taking off her shoes, and far upriver, where the shrine's candles never burned all at once, a figure in a cloak placed a fresh taper in the fourth slot and wrote in a careful hand in the ledger hidden under the altar. "Returned by witnesses. Claimed by service. To be revisited whenever we forget how to kneel." On the day the first school group came that included children who had not been born when the crown was still a rumor, Elena told the story not like a curator, but like a woman who had held paper written by a queen and still believed the best sentence in any language is, "I am sorry." She ended the tour at the circle of chairs and asked the children to sit and listen to the crown be quiet. One boy raised his hand and asked if he could touch it. She said no softly because some things must remain slightly out of reach so that we remember to reach. The boy looked disappointed for 3 seconds and then began to hum the lullaby, and soon the entire hall hummed with him. Small voices practicing a country. Outside, on the palace steps, the old man with the cane fell asleep in the sun. His cane lay across his knees like a satisfied sentence. A woman selling bread counted change and did not bother to hide the tears that came without warning on good days. Z taught a new guard the difference between standing straight and standing ready. Tariq knelt in a small office and read a letter written by a farmer who wanted to know if the new Orinthia would remember old wells. He wrote back by hand. He said yes. There would be elections and arguments and compromises that tasted like dirt. There would be a drought that would try to insist on defining a decade. There would be 100 small selfishnesses and 1,000 errands done without applause. The Shadow Council would test doors with their old keys and find that the locks they had installed had been replaced by questions. Nothing would be perfect, but perfection had never been the point. The point was kneeling and rising at the right times, and teaching your children to hear the chord velvet makes when history chooses. One night, late, Elena placed her palm on the lion's stone and felt warmth carefully returning to places that had been cold too long. She said thank you to no one in particular and to everyone. The room exhaled. And somewhere out in the city, a kettle clicked off and steam lifted like a crown you don't have to wear to deserve. When she left by the east gate, she found Z waiting with the truck and 2 paper cups that claimed to contain coffee. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" she said. "For whatever wants to be witnessed next," he said. They drove into a night that refused to be ominous. The road unwound. Stars complained, then consented. Behind them, on a hill that once wore silence like armor, a museum glowed just enough to help people find the steps, and a crown slept in a circle of chairs, patient, light on the head, heavy in the hand, ready to be carried by anyone willing to bend.